Well, good evening and welcome to Queer News Tonight. This is the world's first and only LGBTQ plus daily evening television news. We're broadcasting live and then available on demand. And we're available on all smart televisions, including Roku, Apple TV, Android TV, Amazon Fire TV, YouTube, and Facebook. It's time to queer up the news. It's Tuesday, February 28th, 2023. We are live and literally out of the closet and into the headlines. So many of your important stories we're going to tell this evening on Queer News Tonight.
This is the world's first live daily LGBTQ evening news show, literally out of the closet and into the headlines on Queer News Tonight with Al Ferguson.
I'm your anchor at Queer News Tonight, Al Ferguson, and this evening we bring you the news of and a perspective representing the LGBTQ plus community from South Florida, America, and across our planet.
This is the world's first and only unedited live LGBTQ plus evening news show. Whatever happens unique in LGBTQ plus news, you will see it and hear it.
Hotspots Magazine, Happening Out Television Network, is a nonprofit 501c3 media company in the same models of PBS and NPR, but designed for our LGBTQ plus community. Our mission is to support the 10 pillars of our LGBTQ plus community. We want to inform and educate the key issues of our Black community, Latino, lesbian, trans, student youths, seniors, HIV/AIDS healthcare, business, political advocacy, and faith. Help us support our community.
We are part of one of the largest LGBTQ plus media companies in America, Hotspots Magazine, Happening Out Television Network.
Our magazine is celebrating 38 years of the LGBTQ plus experience, and our television news, talk, and entertainment shows support our mission to educate the LGBTQ plus and broader community.
Well, let's begin by welcoming anchor Francia. Francia is an Afro-Venezuelan recording artist, singer, songwriter, dancer, lawyer, and yoga practitioner. His first album, Infinita, is streaming on all music platforms and is a genre-fluid melange of Latin rhythms. Before finding his artistic vocation, Francia practiced corporate law in New York City and was a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Welcome, Francia.
Thank you for having me. And speaking of artistic vocation, I want to send a shout out to my friends from Grammy Week. I was stationed at the Grammy Museum in February in LA, participating during Grammy Week. So I want to thank my friend Skylar O'Neill, who's the manager of education and community engagement there. You did an amazing job hosting a slew of events during that week. I also want to thank my friends at the Music Managers Forum. They hosted a great pre-Grammy party where I met folks from the Adarga Group and Adarga Publishing, Henry Alonso, Diana Alfonso, and Stephanie Calvinisti. A huge hug. And now let's welcome John Hayden, a journalist for 28 years. He now works for several outlets, including South Florida Gay News, as a reporter and community editor, covering politics, entertainment, and local events directly impacting the LGBTQ plus community. John has interviewed everyone from presidents to Oscar winners. He's starting an OnlyFans account with the name Happening Out of My Pants, which I believe Al has already subscribed. Wait, what? I think so. Welcome, John.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here tonight. And I just love all of you. Thank you for having me. And now let's welcome anchor Jeff Oliverio. Jeff is founder and treasurer of the Hollywood LGBTQ plus Council and My Hollywood Pride, which just held their second annual event in downtown Hollywood. Jeff is returning as co-chair for the upcoming 2023 National LGBTQ plus Task Force Gala in October. The task force events, including the upcoming Winter Party Festival, have given back more than $3.3 million to LGBTQ plus community organizations in South Florida. Good evening, Jeff.
Good evening. I do want to wish all my task force friends good luck this week. It is Winter Party Week. It's a big, huge week for them. So if you don't have your tickets, go to Winter Party online. Tickets are still available and help raise some money for the LGBTQ plus community in South Florida and across the United States. Let's welcome anchor Gregg Shapiro. An inductee into the Chicago LGBT Hall of Fame, Gregg is the author of 9 books, including the forthcoming Refrain in Light, an entertainment journalist whose celebrity interviews and music reviews run in a variety of regional LGBTQ+ and mainstream publications and websites. His movie review, called Screensaver, can be found in South Florida Gay News, San Francisco's Bay Area Reporter, RottenTomatoes.com, and more. Good evening, Gregg.
Good evening, and thanks for making me sound so interesting. We are the reporters for Queer News Tonight, and this evening we begin with the queer headlines. The LGBTQ+ community in South Florida and across America is diverse. Our community across the world is vast. And here are the bullet points of the Queer News for today, Tuesday, February 28th, 2023, World Spay Day, which is a good reminder to spay and neuter all Republicans, Proud Boys, and Oath Keepers.
I'm so thrilled to be working with Bob Barker tonight. All right. First, let's queer up education. Fear spreads as DeSantis investigates college professors teaching diversity and inclusion. In 1953, McCarthyism was at its height in creating fear in American society. The senator from Wisconsin was suggesting that there was a Red Scare and a communist behind every corner. In Hollywood, entertainers in 1953 were facing the effects of the Red Scare through blacklists of America's entertainers and industry through the Hollywood blacklist. In 1953, Lucille Ball, the #1 star in the world, fell to this blacklist that nearly destroyed her career. She was not indoctrinating America to some secret agenda. And eventually, the blacklist, the Red Scare, and even Senator Joseph McCarthy was moved to the trash heap of those that try to gain power by selling fear. Fast forward 70 years later to 2023, and this time, instead of a Senator McCarthy, a Florida Governor DeSantis is eerily creating a scapegoat and fear around every corner again. Those scapegoats are the LGBTQ+ community, the Black community, the trans community, children, drag queens, and now college professors. An English professor at Florida Palm Beach Atlantic University says his job is under review now after his employer told him it received a complaint that he is indoctrinating students. Professor Sam Jokel said, quote, "The racial justice unit is what got me in hot water," end quote. He said he had been teaching a unit on racial justice in classes for many years without any complaints, until his provost and dean said this week they needed to talk to him privately at the end of class. The two told him his contract renewal for next year would be on hold as they investigated the materials used in the racial justice unit. Jokel shared a letter from the university saying a decision about his employment would be made by March 15th. Jokel said, quote, "They told me they had concerns that I was indoctrinating students." That was the exact word they used, indoctrinating. "I had no idea this was coming," end quote. Jokel said his conversation with his employers indicated the investigation was prompted by a complaint from a parent. PBA is a private Christian university. DeSantis was on the campus of PBA on the exact same day. However, these actions may be coming to Florida's public universities, as Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has proposed plans to defund all diversity, equity, and inclusion programs at state colleges and universities in Florida. And his administration rejected a proposed advanced placement African American studies course in high schools, partly explained as being based on queer theory. Queer News Tonight has now spoken to 3 Florida Public University professors at 3 separate Florida institutions. They have alerted us that the investigation of the same diversity, equity, and inclusion program concerns in their classrooms. Several sources indicate all emails and texts with public universities and colleges are now being collected and reviewed by the state. Queer News Tonight can accurately report that the Union for College Educators in Florida and attorneys for many Florida universities are now actively involved in the growing investigations from Governor DeSantis and Florida's state government over professors believed to be involved in diversity and equality and inclusion programs. We will continue to follow this very disturbing story, straight out of the shameful headlines of 1953, except this is 2023. To me, this is an incredibly scary story. The reason we see the parallel connections to what happened in 53 is McCarthy ultimately destroyed his entire career. He was found to be essentially lying on the fact that in Hollywood, people in government in Washington, people in business were being compromised by communists, by the Soviet Union. Basically, after time, the story essentially falls apart. But the careers it destroyed in Washington, in business, and in Hollywood were still laid waste. And the amount of time to catch up to what was really being done took time for the pendulum to swing back. We are just now watching. We're just now beginning to tell this story in a different way to what we're seeing in schools, what we're seeing in our libraries, what we're seeing at our events at LGBT with drag queens, and now what we're seeing. This is not K through 3rd. By the way, there's also breaking news about the expansion to 8th grade. But this is now college professors that are being investigated and gathering information of all of their texts and all of their emails to prove some kind of witch hunt that they're indoctrinating students. It's a very, in my opinion, a very disturbing moment.
You know, my interest in law stemmed from a class I took in college called Law and Society. And then we were looking at constitutional law. We were looking at First Amendment issues. If we take this and expand it, these classes would be banned. And if we take it to law schools, we wouldn't be able to teach the Constitution at all, which makes absolutely no sense. And so this is incredibly problematic, and I hope that it gets stopped.
I'm curious, I want to piggyback on that observation. If the equity and inclusion broad term definition is accepted, and he is able to defund and to every state president, every president of a state college and university has signed on to capitulate, that they'll follow his instruction. Do you suppose, because I haven't heard conversation about this, that it could be followed into law schools? Could it happen at Florida State and University of Florida?
They'll certainly try to, but not without a fight, right? So I don't know if you've seen Just Mercy, the movie with Michael B. Jordan. That movie, it's about my law school professor, Brian Stevenson, the founder of the Equal Justice Initiative. We're going to fight it. He's going to fight it. And we're all going to fight it because it cannot extend to that. Every single class essentially would run afoul of this law. And so it cannot happen. And I'm certainly concerned about it.
I also wonder, the universities, especially in Florida and across, the South, sports is a very big component of those schools. The schools that play in the SEC are typically the biggest, college football fans. I have not heard anything from the sports associations who are predominantly African American and Latino, and so you're now attending a school where you cannot teach diversity, equity, and inclusion, but playing sports representing this school. I challenge, the college, sports associations out there. We need to hear from them. We need to hear, how is this going to impact your players? Who wants to come to school here when your identity is not being able to be celebrated, educated, acknowledged? I
know y'all want to jump in. Please do. But I want to make an observation and comparative example of that. To your point, your challenge of sports and sports leagues and people that are associated to this to stand up. One clear example where they did not is the tourism industry. When Disney was attacked, Stacy Ritter, the executive director of Visit Lauderdale, said specifically in an interview with me that she was disappointed that the tourism industry of Orlando did not stand up vigorously in defense of Walt Disney World. And at the end of the day, Visit Orlando and other related tourism interest in organizations in Central Florida did not come to vigorous defense of Disney to say, you are damaging our tourism industry. It's a similar situation to what you just challenged. You wonder if Governor DeSantis has not created so much power that even that won't happen, because the Orlando tourism industry would not do that. And we reported last night in Queer News Tonight about the pressure that Tampa Pride is under. They lose 6 sponsors for $100,000, all out-of-state sponsors. And one of those sponsors is quoted as saying that if he can take on Disney, he can become president of the United States and then therefore take on any business he wants, including us. And it created a chill effect fear. I just make the connection of the dots here.
Yeah, I'd like to address that in just a second. But first, didn't last year DeSantis replace a state university president? Well, I think it was University of Florida. He appointed his own person, didn't consult any other board members. So he's already taking over the universities at the highest level in a very partisan way, which deviates at least a lot further than it usually has in the past. And what I'm about to say next, I have no polling to back it up. It's just a feeling I've had from watching and covering news and watching sort of how things ebb and flow over time. I think DeSantis is at risk of becoming a victim of excessive power. He will become a victim of it. He's got supermajorities in the legislature. He can do literally anything he wants in the state. And if he's going to run, it's going to motivate the collar counties around Philadelphia and in Pennsylvania. It's going to motivate a little further out from Detroit in Michigan, where it would have been before. The Democratic Party is probably not going to put dime one into national elections next year into Florida after what happened last year. It's not worth it when you're going to have to put it into money to try and re-win Georgia, to try and shore up Arizona and Wisconsin. But he's just I think that he's going to have such a track record that he's going to shore up the base. But if any of the moderates come out in any kind of meaningful number in the swing states, I think he's going to lose. And I think it's going to be his fault because he was too extreme in Florida. And Florida is a place that people watch.
Well, we've often made 1939 and 1953 references and comparisons here on the show on a regular basis. And what's taking place here in Florida is frightening enough, but the fact that Governor Despicable, aided and abetted by his fellow Republicans, seems to be unstoppable as he bulldozes his way across the strait in what's clearly a reign of terror. And that's probably the most horrifying thing of all. He really feels unstoppable.
Well, we move on and we queer up politics. History made as Florida LGBTQ+ caucus elects trans man as president and trans woman as vice president to fight DeSantis. Already this year, the greatest number of anti-LGBTQ+ laws in history have been introduced in Florida and across the USA. Widely understood, these culture war opportunities are for radical conservatives and evangelicals to win elections at the expense of our LGBTQ+ children, drag queens, and more. But the top attacks are reserved for the trans community. The most marginalized are always the most defenseless. All the more reason to celebrate what Florida LGBTQ+ Democratic Caucus did this week. They are the largest queer political activist grassroots organization in Florida with more than 20 chapters across the state. President Stephen Gaskell turned the reins over to the newly elected president, Nathan Brummer, and Vice President, Kristen Browdy. The historic nature of this new leadership is that Brummer is a trans man and Browdy is a trans woman. The membership of the Florida LGBTQ+ Democratic Caucus will have 2 trans community leaders to take on Governor DeSantis and the radical agenda of the GOP. Brummer is a well-known activist that served as LGBTQ+ state advocate under Commissioner Nikki Fried. Browdy is the past chair of the National Trans Bar Association.
In the past week, there have been 17 arrests or convictions of adults accused of having sex with children. Of those 17, 14 were pastors or youth pastors at Christian churches. One was the husband of a youth pastor. One, a police officer. None were drag queens.
They are both attorneys and now face the work to encourage LGBTQ plus Florida to face the presidential and national elections next year. And next year is the key. Like I spoke earlier, DeSantis is going to continue to run roughshod and do whatever he wants this year. We can stand up, we can shout, we can sit here and talk about it all we want, but he gets to do whatever he wants. Democrats have zero power in the legislature. Their first job is to help recruit candidates, gay, straight, whatever, allies, we need them, for the state house to try and at least wrest some power back from Republicans. After that, maybe they can get rid of Rick Scott. He's vulnerable as a first-term senator. But their main job is to get us to the polls. You've said it so much leading up to the elections last year, Al. We have to come out and vote. That's priority number one. After that, we can get all the candidates we need and everything else. But first, we have to make people aware. And it's going to get much, much worse before it ever gets better. So please start listening to them. I talked with Nathan yesterday. He's very upbeat despite the incredibly steep uphill climb that he has to go.
Talk about powerful leadership. I had the opportunity to interact with Kristen Browdy in New York. She, in addition to being the president of the National Trans Bar Association, she was also a past president of Legal, which is the New York LGBT Bar Association. And talk about fierce, talk about a great advocate. So I'm so excited that she's moved to Florida and we have her advocacy here.
I know you were saying that there's probably not going to be a lot of national investment in Florida, but on Sunday I got to see the Victory Institute and SAVE did an event on Sunday night, a fundraiser, and the Victory Institute, of course, which helps train and encourage LGBTQ candidates to run for office. And they said, this money and the fundraising that's being done is going directly back into Florida because they need to be where they need to convert people. Yeah. And so meaning they need to go where the non-believers are and try to build grassroots organizations, people, candidates, whether it's at city, state, all the different levels of government. We need to have representation, and they're behind that. So I encourage people to go and, support the Victory Fund, support SAVE and the great work that they do along with the Florida LGBTQ Caucus.
Well, I do wish Brummer and Browdy the best of luck in their endeavors, but they really are up against truly challenging odds. And I hope they do good things.
For me, interesting, I've spent 3 days in Orlando for the conference, LGBT Democratic Caucus Conference. It was, I believe, the 5th that I had attended. I did many interviews, the most number of interviews I've ever done at a Democratic LGBT conference. In many respects, without the stars of people like Val Demings and so many names that I could go through that I interviewed in over the years at this caucus, I have to say over the weekend in Orlando, without any of those necessarily named stars, it was my favorite one that I visited. And the reason in covering as a news story, and the reason is because it was crystal clear to the Democrats in the room, it was crystal clear to the LGBT community and their allies in the room that they've absolutely hit bottom. They've chinned, they've skinned their chin, they've skinned their elbows, they've skinned their knees because they got crushed at midterms. Now, it's not for lack of trying, but the situation in Florida, when you move from the previous governor's election of losing by 14,000 votes to losing by 1.7 million votes or whatever it was, something dramatic happened in Florida. There was that reality in the room. One of the things that I think is really good at this moment of this story is all of the base of the hardest core of LGBT base, and I suspect the same thing is going on at the task force. I suspect the same thing is going on at HRC. I suspect the exact same thing is going on at SAVE. You've gotten the crap kicked out of you, and you're beginning to go, okay, what are we going to do different? Because if you think we're going away, that ain't happening. And the caucus says that this weekend by a membership that elects Nathan Brummer. He's, of course, well known because of Nikki Fried and being the statewide LGBT advocate. But Christine Browdy comes in And frankly, she's a badass. And she's going to make it clear, you can knock us down, but believe me, I'm going to take out a few of your teeth as I go down. And Nathan is a more satin glove kind of approach. But the one thing that is super interesting about this story is they elect a trans man and a trans woman to lead at a time when trans is the #1 attack in America and Florida.
It's brilliant.
It's very encouraging, I think. Maybe you can't see it yet, but I really think that they're starting to set, and I think they're starting to set a plan. And I think the task force is there. I think HRC is there. I think SAVE is there, and other organizations of advocacy for our community. Now, if our community will just listen and follow
and vote.
And to your point, it is said that breakdowns always lead to breakthroughs. For us to this new leadership.
Great comment.
Next, let's queer up the world view. Japanese Prime Minister apologizes to LGBTQ+ activists over former aide's bigoted remarks. Japan's Prime Minister Fumio Kishida apologized for discriminatory remarks made by his former aide during a meeting with LGBTQ+ groups. In January, backlash over remarks by Arai brought fresh attention to Japan's lack of legislation on civil rights protections for the LGBTQ+ community and policies on same-sex marriage. Just a day after, Kishida announced he had dismissed Arai for his anti-LGBTQ+ comments, which the former aide later apologized for. Kishida also met with activists from LGBTQ+ organizations in Japan on February 17th and offered an apology for anti-LGBTQ+ remarks made by former government aide Masayoshi Arai. Kishida said Arai's remarks were deemed unjust discrimination and were extremely inappropriate. After the meeting, Gon Matsunaka, head of the Pride House Tokyo, told reporters that Kishida said he hoped to take action step-by-step approach to LGBTQ rights and fighting discrimination. Japan Alliance for LGBT Legislation Executive Director Yuichi Kamiya said he expected a move toward equal rights to drastically accelerate. He has also appointed Masako Mori, a former justice minister, as his special aide in charge of promoting understanding for LGBTQ+ people in Japan. Japan remains the only G7 nation that hasn't legally recognized same-sex marriage or enacted an anti-discrimination law to protect LGBTQ+ people. And I haven't shared this before on the table, but the bulk of my pro bono practice when I was back in private practice was on same-sex marriage. And LGBTQ rights. And my former law firm, Morrison Forster, has an office in Tokyo, and the former head of that office, Jim Hoff, who was my mentor, worked exclusively on this issue in his pro bono practice. And there's a great organization there called Lawyers for LGBT Allies Network, and they're working with the Chamber of Commerce of Japan to galvanize the business community as well as civil society to actually get numbers on surveys and such to advocate on behalf of these couples. And it seems like the appetite is not there on the government side, but when it comes to the community, when it comes to the business community, the case is there and their support is there. And so hopefully these comments by the Prime Minister signal a switch, or potentially, and the fact that there's an appointed special commission, we might see some movement there. And I want to say hello to the board members of an organization that I'm a part of. It's a regional LGBT network of lawyers who are working on this issue. It's called Somos Familias, We Are Family. And we work on litigation for same-sex marriage and on the legislative side as well. And I had the fortune as a fresh summer associate to work on a draft of a litigation brief that we filed against the state of Mexico. We sued them before the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights on same-sex marriage protections. And we have had some traction in Chile, in Mexico, and these practices, we're sharing them with other countries. The founder of this organization is Evan Wolfson, who we are no stranger to him, founder of Freedom to Marry, done great work here in the United States, and we share best practices. We share what works, and there's movement in Japan. Just recently, Dan Levinson, who's a partner in Singapore office, had a webinar on advancements on Japan. These things take time, but we're hoping that with this community of lawyers and organizations, we can move forward.
Francia, I'm curious with the interconnection of your mentorship and the firm that you were doing pro bono work for. Help us understand why Japan is slow. What's going on in Japan It goes on in the Far East and Asia generally anyway, but Japan is different.
I'm no expert in Asia, the Asia region. I'm much more knowledgeable in Latin America, but I find that Japanese society is very conservative. Right, we have this extreme work ethic. We have this extreme in many different ways. And when it comes to social issues such as this one, there's this respectability politics that plays in. You're not allowed to really speak your mind in public. It's a very conservative society, and I think that ties into why there is pushback and there's a little bit of hesitancy to have this. The Prime Minister recently said that same-sex marriage policies must be scrutinized and looked at very closely. And there's in general that atmosphere of before we do anything, it has to be very cautious, very, very gradual. And that probably plays into
And the reason I ask you that, you may not be aware, from a tourism eye, Tokyo is in Asia. Is the most pro-supporting LGBT tourism destination in all of Asia. Tokyo's Convention and Visitors Bureau and the tourism arm there is the most pro of trying to attract international LGBT traffic to Japan. So there's this disconnect of the tourism community and the tourism business community and what is going on across the board in the country.
Yeah, myself, I included, I had no idea that it wasn't supported until hearing this story. And because I had the idea of tourism and that it seemed like a country that was so welcoming to LGBTQ tourists and visitors, that I assumed wrongly that we had protections there. But it's a good reminder of those protections are not everywhere and they're easily taken away.
Do you think it's a case of they'll just take the tourist dollar, but not?
Well, knowing what Tokyo does, it doesn't feel self-serving. They are embracing in so many ways, going farther than they would need to be self-serving. So I generally don't think that that's what the issue is.
And to your point, you just kind of assume that Japan was. I think we might be grading on a regional curve. Like Tokyo is, of course, the front face of Japan, but Japan is more open than, say, what's coming out of Beijing. Exactly. What's coming out of Beijing. What's coming out of Indonesia, Burma. So I think that we're sort of might be judging, like, compared to its neighbors, it's doing really well.
Really terrific point. One other thing that I think is interesting here in relation to the news of the Prime Minister's action of sacking the minister. He reminds me, now I'm sitting outside the Asia-Japan fishbowl and just looking into the fishbowl. But he reminds me of, in a way, Barack Obama in 2008. Barack Obama in 2008 was not homophobic by any stretch, but he also was not embracing gay marriage by any stretch. And he's starting an evolution that took Joe Biden to be much stronger on the subject, to say, behind the scenes, I imagine in my head, or perhaps fantasize in my head, of grabbing him by the collar and shaking him a bit. And he comes along, and then he walks, then he jogs, then he runs, then he sprints, and the White House is lit up in rainbow in 2015. I get the sense feel that that's what we're beginning to watch from the Prime Minister in Japan, of coming into a broader thought. So in general, I think this Prime Minister is Barack Obama in 2008.
Next, let's queer up drag culture. Proud Boys violently attack supporters at DC area drag queen story hour.
Not the unfortunate hate and chaos that was displayed here over the weekend.
This is ridiculous. You should be ashamed of yourself.
This was the scene Saturday afternoon outside Loyalty bookstores on Ellsworth. Signs, megaphones, and two groups going back and forth.
We were physically preventing the Proud Boys from breaking through us and reaching those families.
Members and volunteers with Parasol Patrol DMV, a group that shields kids from protesters, were outside trying to protect families who were inside for a monthly drag story hour event. The local chapter of the organization was co-founded last year by Montgomery County Council council member Kristen Mink.
It became necessary because there were protesters who were showing up trying to disrupt the events. They're scaring the children, scaring the families, shouting transphobic, homophobic slogans, and attempting to intimidate folks who were attending those events.
But this event was different.
This was the most physical that it got.
The evidence is on his nose.
Assumedly to get into and disrupt the story time.
As John Zittrower and volunteers stood outside the bookstore trying to stop members of the Proud Boys from getting inside the event, he got hit.
In the ensuing melee, somebody tagged me either with a signpost or a hand or an elbow. I'm not really positive. And someone told me that my nose was bleeding pretty heavily.
It didn't stop there. In cell phone footage shared with Fox 5 DC, you see what appears to be a member of the Proud Boys shouting, yelling, and even stomping on one of the Parasol Patrol volunteers. Montgomery County Police were called to break up the crowd. They say no one was arrested and no reports of injuries. John tells us he didn't want to press charges.
I mean, it would have been hard enough to find out what happened because it was so chaotic, but also like my main focus and the main focus of the group was to make sure all the families were safe and the performer was safe and everybody got back to their cars okay.
Councilmember Mink says even with the disruption, the kids were safe and she believes they had a great time.
The kids who were inside had a wonderful time, a joyful time. They did the hokey pokey. They read wonderful books.
We have a large, vibrant, and supportive community, which is not going to slow down or stop anytime soon.
Police in a Maryland suburb of Washington, D.C. had to intervene when violent Proud Boys tried to force themselves into a drag queen story hour event at a bookstore. Families with small children had assembled at Loyalty Books in Silver Spring to enjoy a drag queen story hour event a few days ago. Outside, far-right protesters came to demonstrate against it. One person suffered a facial injury during the standoff between the Proud Boys and LGBTQ+ supporters. Meanwhile, a counter-protest shielding the bookstore's entrance with colorful umbrellas and pride flags prevented any children from being hurt, and the event inside went on as planned. Protesters yelled anti-LGBT+ slurs and accused counter-protesters from the Parasol Patrol DMV group of being groomers. In addition to carrying rainbow umbrellas to obscure the signs to the children at the event, Parasol Patrol members played music and sang songs to drown out protesters jeering. Montgomery Council member Kristen Mink said the situation escalated when Proud Boys kicked, punched, and shoved people. Mink herself was kicked. The far-right and some Republican politicians falsely demonized drag queens, transgender people, and other members of the LGBTQ+ community as groomers. Drag queen story hours had become targets of these far-right extremists. One thing I'd like to do tonight and going forward is I don't want to use the term far-right extremists. I think we need to use the term domestic terrorists because this is terrorism. We are being terrorized by the Proud Boys. So the Proud Boys are a terrorist organization. I'm tired of saying there's people with umbrellas shielding children from people that are carrying machine guns in these protests in the streets. So these are terrorists, and that's what we need to call them. They want to call us groomers, let's call them terrorists, because that's exactly what they are. And it's frightening to see this because, and we have to realize the Proud Boys have gone on an arc now. It went from vaccines and masks, it then went to abortion, and now it's come to us because their agenda, it really isn't specific to the LGBTQ+ community. It's to create chaos and to basically, as they tried on January 6th, overtake the government. So this is a terrorist organization trying to overthrow the government in the United States. When are we going to wake up and do something serious in this country to get rid of these attacks? Not just on LGBTQ+ people, women's rights, black, science, Latino, immigrants. It needs to stop, and we need to call it what it is. It's terrorism.
I would say that January 6th is now their model for everything.
Yes.
They've taken over the school board down in Miami-Dade County, the Proud Boys specifically as a group. And I'm watching this, and it reminds me of protests outside abortion clinics to scare the crap out of women, prevent them from going in to exercise their rights to their own health. That's exactly the same fight. It's exactly the same thing. People coming in, people escorting people into the building, people shielding them from attacks. They're using the same model over and over again. And we do, like you said, we need to wake up to what they say. And let's just be very clear. They don't give a crap about children. They don't give a damn about any child. They will use them to shield bullets before they would take one themselves.
Yeah, I want to ask to both observations and to all of you. So the issue, let's accept these observations. Why is the strength of this domestic terrorism group growing then? Why isn't the LGBTQ community just in uproar like ACT UP was on AIDS? Why hasn't the LGBTQ community responded to this overwhelmingly? Montgomery County, we appreciate the organization that is doing the Rainbow Umbrella Shields, but why wasn't there? That's Washington, D.C. Why wasn't there 1,000 people to protect those students? Why aren't we turning out?
I'm sorry.
No, last week we reported on a report about the conditions of the LGBTQ community, and we talked about homelessness. We talked about, we have so many issues that we're facing simultaneously, in addition to fighting off the Proud Boys, that it's an overwhelming time to be LGBT, queer, Latino, immigrant. And from my perspective, you have to pick and choose, right? I think our livelihood is important. We have to consider all these conditions before we go and put ourselves in harm's way. And I think that has to, that has something to do with it.
But I think ACT UP is a good model because ACT UP formed in other cities. It sprung up and it was doing stuff. And maybe this parasol group is a really good, is an idea that may catch on in other places. And as you mentioned, Montgomery County is a really progressive county. It's not the kind of place that this kind of thing would usually happen, and probably these idiots were bussed in from somewhere else, like, you know, West Virginia. Right. Probably from West Virginia.
Hey.
So,
Right.
Sorry.
Whoa.
They're probably from the Carolinas.
Yeah, okay.
From the Carolinas. That's where they're from.
Okay.
But I do want to say, I think that the media plays a role in this because, again, we're using the language that the Proud Boys were protesting a drag queen story hour. You know, during Pride events or LGBTQ events, you used to see the Bible, putting up Bible verses and those things. That's a protest. This is a terrorist organization terrorizing people. Violent. So the media is even, and that's why I'm glad we're talking about it here. Even looking at that story on the news, it kind of seemed like, well, there's one group that didn't like this drag queen story on. There's another group with parasol.
They're equal.
They didn't say like, this is, they didn't describe the Proud Boys. Even their name sounds less threatening than they actually are. They're a terrorist organization. If you said Al Qaeda was at a drag queen story hour, what would people say?
Yeah.
Terrorist.
Al, just to your point, why aren't we standing up? Because until like recently, and maybe we still are, we're still bigger than the Proud Boys. The LGBTQ community is still bigger. 25 years ago, we were becoming ascendant. We were starting the long march towards marriage equality and all the rights that are now being tried to turn back. They're sort of following in our footsteps, taking unpopular positions, being really loud about it, and forcing their way, this time violently, unlike the LGBTQ movement post-Stonewall. They're the ones that are ascending and trying to become more powerful. So they're being louder and they're being heard. They're following our model.
One final thought on this, and to this point of domestic terrorism, I've got to really begin to process in that way. And by the way, let's put Moms for Liberty in that exact same group.
Absolutely.
Your political association matters, and we have to remember those that are associating with Moms for Liberty, Million Moms, the Proud Boys, those people that are associating with them, we should be listening to them and we should believe them.
Yes.
When that demonstration took place on Las Olas, and Proud Boys is demonstrating against the LGBTQ community, and the school board member for Broward County showed up and voiced support, that school board member of bluest of blue Broward County School Board is associating with the Proud Boys and Moms for Liberty to say that organization is A-OK with me, and I'm a school board member for Broward County. We should believe her. And we should be reminded, as they are domestic terrorist organizations, that this school board member is aligning with them. And this is the same organization that attacks the Capitol on January 6th. Proud Boys, you cannot believe, stand by, as Donald Trump said to them, because if you do, they are going to be this domestic terrorist army to accomplish what they want. And Moms for Liberty, doesn't that sound wonderful, is going in right along with them.
Another thing I just wanted to, again, highlight about the Proud Boys is they're trying to ingratiate themselves into different places that they're organizing. I read an article in Vice about them that they were doing toy drives and food donations in certain places that they were rejected when it came to light. But again, they're doing these things to make them look like, oh, look, we're just like everybody else, except we're trying to overthrow the government and terrorize people. But here's some food. Here's some. We got some toys for Santa.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. Right.
Next, let's clear up drag culture. Say no to RuPaul as Tennessee sets to become first U.S. state to ban drag.
Take a look. My concern with this is the breadth of the language, Mr. Sponsor. And the breadth of this language takes direct aim at the local economy of my city. It takes direct aim at the entertainers within my city. It takes direct aim with the small businesses in my community. And so the language of this bill, now, I don't know if you've ever attended a Beyonce concert. Something tells me you haven't. Or a Harry Styles concert, or a Lizzo concert, or a Madonna concert. Your language prohibiting and the breadth, the vagueness in this bill would prohibit those entertainers from performing in my city. It would prohibit Beyonce, the Queen Bee herself, who is coming to Nashville this year. This bill would allow me as a district attorney, by the plain language of this bill, to arrest Beyonce. Is that your intended goal here?
Tennessee lawmakers passed a bill banning drag shows in public on Thursday, sending the measure to the Republican Governor Bill Lee's desk. In Tennessee's bill, a first offense would be treated as a misdemeanor, but a second offense would be treated as a felony. The law would make Tennessee the first state to ban public drag, which could also affect LGBTQ plus pride celebrations and transgender people who are in shows of any kind. Currently, 20 bills in 15 U.S. states are aimed at drag queen performances. In past years, bills in other states that targeted transgender people prompted strong negative reactions from business leaders, out of concern that discriminatory legislation would make it more difficult to woo clients, talent, and corporate relocations. It's well documented in the economic literature that discrimination against LGBTQ plus people damages their economic, physical, and mental well-being. Additionally, discriminatory bills like the one in Tennessee can lower a nation's GDP. Aaron Reed, a queer legislative researcher and transgender rights activist, said, quote, "The language of the bill is very broad and doesn't differentiate between trans people and drag performers. Drag queen story hours will no longer be rushed by Proud Boys, but cops," end quote. Distract, distract, distract. Distract from Tennessee's embarrassing literacy rate. Distract from the state's poverty rate, which is 6.25% higher than the average in the U.S. Distract from the state's teen pregnancy rate, where it ranks 10th highest. Just keep distracting.
Good comments.
You know what concerns me about this bill is the way that we're attacking this bill. They're like, oh, it's so broadly written. Well, how broad it is, even if it was narrow, it would still be vile and offensive. And this is not going to be a winning argument as we move across the states to try and move it. We have got to come up with better arguments than, oh, it's too broad. Like, we need to more narrowly discriminate. Like, if they've got mascara on but no eyeliner, then they're fine. This is just not a winning argument or a way to attack this bill.
Francia, you were talking about in Japan about the business community coming together to, to help forward LGBTQ rights. In Tennessee, we have FedEx, we have HCA, Dollar General, the entire country music industry in Tennessee. Again, where are these organizations where, I hope that the HRC is going out, which galvanizes corporations. And glad to speak out against this. I don't hear enough. And again, we know that we know what's happened here. Right. We know what's happened here in Disney, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't still press these companies that we all do business with of saying, what are you doing in the state where you're organized for business? Because you know what? There are other states where FedEx can move their headquarters. There are other states that HCA can move their headquarters. They don't need to be in Tennessee. So what are they doing? And I challenge them to ask those questions.
Yeah, if we think about what the representative was saying, and we take RuPaul at her word, we're all born naked and the rest is drag, right? Yeah. This is technically drag. So if I were to give a lecture out in Tennessee, would this count? Would I be first offense misdemeanor, second offense felony? So I think it's so dangerous and so problematic because drag is anything that is not being naked, as far as I'm concerned. Absolutely. And that it's incredibly problematic. I could be a felon, literally, for wearing what I'm wearing.
The bottom line of what we're watching in Tennessee, there's every indication the governor is going to sign this law. What we're watching in Tennessee is not an issue of grooming. It is not an issue of children. It is not. It is on the issue of gender identity. The radical voice of the GOP, especially driven by evangelicals, are wanting to have a universal definition of this is a man, there is no exception. This is a woman, there is no exception. Trans is at the tip of the sword of their attack. But drag is beginning to evolve into a secondary argument for them because they think it's a winning issue in terms of this protect the children and protect parents' rights. Well, wait, parents are bringing their children to a drag show. So whose parental rights are you protecting? That does not seem to matter. What they are pursuing is the idea that anything that modifies the gender identification of traditional male at birth, traditional female at birth is bad, is wrong. And as a result, that's why you get such ridiculous legislation of this that is very likely going to be, it's passed in the legislature and likely going to be signed by the governor. The issue is not why they're doing it. That's why they're doing it. But the issue is what is the LGBTQ community going to do about it? What are business community going to do about it? What is the tourism community going to do about it? Let me tell you for sure, one thing that hits Tennessee between the eyes, it's the reason why North Carolina's completely backed off of their bathroom bill. Sports teams, businesses, conventions, the tourism industry of the world said, we're not coming back to Charlotte. And it killed the bathroom bill. In this, it's even worse than that because the issues in Tennessee, their number one industry in the Gatlinburg, Pigeon Forge Valley, in Memphis to a secondary bit, in a secondary way, but for sure in Nashville, which is a blue island like Fort Lauderdale, their number one industry is not music, it's tourism. Their number two industry is music, which generally, even in country music, is progressive. They're taking gigantic risk of the backlash that's going to be focused on national attention as this digests into American society, in America's psyche. And good riddance to you, Tennessee, if you foolishly pursue this. Because certainly California, and certainly New York, and then progressive business thinking around the country, right? Mississippi's not going to come to our aid, and Alabama's not going to come to our aid, but there are plenty of places where tourism decision-making is made in other places that say, Tennessee is a hot potato and we take it off the table. And you're going to lose millions of dollars because you want to define whether you're a male or a female, because of the clothing you wear. Good luck to you, Tennessee. You're in for a world of hurt.
Next, we are proud of our special partnership with Sunshine Cathedral, the world's largest queer church here in Fort Lauderdale. Supporting that partnership, we're broadcasting from our permanent set here at Sunshine Cathedral at the Happening Out television studios. We broadcast Sunshine Cathedral Sunday International Service at 10:30 a.m.
G'day everyone, I'm Australian cellist James Clark, and Sunshine Cathedral is my queer church.
Well, Fox News, Tucker Carlson, by the way, they're in the news this week, everybody following, and radical conservatives have suggested the LGBTQ community has a secret plan. We can only guess it's for world domination, and we couldn't agree more. And we are going to tell you all about it in our segment called The Gay Agenda.
In The Gay Agenda, we queer up the USA view. No gay groups in this St. Patrick's Day New York parade. The ban on LGBTQ groups from Staten Island St. Patrick's Day parade will stay in place for at least another year, after organizers turned away the Pride Center of Staten Island and the Gay Officers Action League during a hostile registration event on February 12th. When Carol Bullock, the executive director of Pride Center Staten Island, showed up to register at the table alongside LGBTQ plus marchers and allies to sign up for the borough's March 5th St. Patrick's Day parade, she met with antagonism from the event's organizer, Larry Cummings, who has repeatedly rejected her pleas for inclusion in the annual march. Every year, she is turned away.
In The Gay Agenda, we queer up politics. Final day of LGBTQ plus Black History Month celebrates surge of Black LGBTQ plus elected leaders. As per the LGBTQ Victory Institute's Powering Equality report, representation of Black LGBTQ plus people in elected positions has increased significantly over the last 5 years, being elected in record numbers. While the number of elected people who identify as part of the LGBTQ plus community has increased by 108% since 2018, researchers found that the number of Black elected LGBTQ plus officials has grown by 317%. Whereas in 2018, 30 Black LGBTQ plus elected officials had been voted into office, in 2023, that number is at least 125. According to that report, Black, queer, and trans women stood out, increasing their representation by 256% compared to 89% overall for all LGBTQ plus women.
In The Gay Agenda, we queer up LGBTQ plus civil rights. George Santos, only queer member of Congress that co-sponsors bill calling for a rollback of LGBTQ plus rights. Gay Representative George Santos, a Republican from New York, is once again the only out LGBTQ plus member of Congress to back an anti-LGBTQ plus bill. This time, a resolution referred to as a Women's Bill of Rights that doesn't include any actual rights for women. Instead, the bill intends to attack LGBTQ plus people's rights. The resolution reaffirms 6 points, the first 3 of which are about words sex would be defined as biological sex at birth. Words like woman and man would be defined based on sex assigned at birth, and mother and father are defined based on sex.
In The Gay Agenda, we queer up LGBTQ plus civil rights. Black history closes with 5 events you never learned in school. It's been said that history is often written by the victors, but in the case of the Civil War, the saying might not hold true. Although the Union Army of the North won the war, the Southern Confederacy may have won the narrative that followed. No wonder many adults educated after 1877 in U.S. public schools never learned about these 5 accomplishments achieved by and injustices faced by African Americans: redlining and racist housing practices, Elizabeth Mumbet Freeman sues for freedom, Tulsa was home to Black Wall Street, Mary Kenner changes lives forever, and Ocoee Election Day Massacre.
In the gay agenda, we queer up sports. Former NFL star player arrested for strangling son's boyfriend. A former NFL player gets arrested after allegedly assaulting his son and his son's boyfriend outside his Indiana home. NBC News reports that police responded to a delayed domestic disturbance at the home of retired Indianapolis Colts lineman and former radio host Joe Stasiak after a young man called the police saying Stasiak had attacked him. Stasiak was arrested and charged with a felony count of strangulation and 2 misdemeanor counts of battery. Stasiak's son said his father, quote, punched him, causing his lip to bleed, end quote, and then punched the boyfriend. The boyfriend told police that Stasiak flashed a gun and held it against the boyfriend's face. Stasiak reportedly told the 2 young men that they were, quote, lucky he saw who it was, end quote. That is today's news for the LGBTQ plus community on the world's first and only daily LGBTQ plus evening news show.
If our community is important to you, share this news with your friends and family. Are you, like most of America, part of our very large television audience watching this live LGBTQ plus news broadcast right now on Roku, Apple TV, Android TV, and Amazon Fire TV?
Queer News Tonight is the only live LGBTQ plus digital television show in the world that is out of the closet and into the headlines. We need your support. If our community is to grow, we must tell the stories and bring them to the attention of the broader world.
This is the only place in the world that tells these types of LGBTQ plus stories in motion and sound. That is the passion of Hotspots Magazine, Happening Out Television Network, and Queer News Tonight.
I'm your anchor, Al Ferguson, and on behalf of these LGBTQ plus reporters, the anchors of Queer News Tonight, including Francia, John Hayden, Jeff Oliverio, and Gregg Shapiro, we will see you daily at 8 p.m. But before we finish tonight's broadcast, we have one final story.
Finally, we queer up the big interview. Kristen Browdy is a new sheriff in town for Florida's trans community as Governor Ron DeSantis takes notice. Kristen Browdy is not a new name in American LGBTQ plus activism. As past chair of the National Trans Bar Association, she knows the legal ins and outs of the hateful rhetoric that is increasing in voice in America. This attorney has run for New York State Legislature and was a central champion for Equality New York. Now, she is a new resident of South Florida, and her impact on Florida has seen immediate results. This week, Browdy was elected by the Florida LGBTQ plus Democratic Caucus as vice president. Browdy's first interview was to sit down with Queer News Tonight lead anchor Al Ferguson. Browdy wanted to see Orlando's Pulse nightclub and the memorial, a first ever visit. As she approached the iconic Pulse sign with Al, she became emotional of what Pulse meant to the LGBTQ plus community and the hateful politics and religious extremism that led to the tragedy. She sits down for this exclusive interview and discusses Florida, Governor Ron DeSantis, and what has to happen next for trans and LGBTQ plus equality.
Al Ferguson at Queer News Tonight, and we are coming from the Florida LGBTQ Democratic Caucus. It's going on their convention here in Orlando, and we're learning about all of the latest that is going on in our LGBTQ community, in politics, and all of the major issues that face the LGBTQ community in Florida. Of course, everyone knows that trans and trans rights and the culture war that's being launched from the governor's mansion and in state houses. We're exporting hate all over the country to state houses. So we've just finished in watching a very informative discussion about the trans community. I'm very happy to bring one of the guests that participated in that panel as a guest here to Queer News Tonight. And this is Kristen Browdy, is past chairman of the National Trans Bar Association. Christine, thank you very much for being with us here at Queer News Tonight.
Glad to be here, Al.
I understand you're a new resident in our neck of the woods, Miami-Dade County. We always make the joke, you probably don't get the colloquial nature of the jokes, but we always make the joke, we're in Broward County, so we have to have a passport to come down and visit you in Dade County, and you have to have a passport to come and visit us.
I'll make sure you have a visa.
Yes, exactly. So welcome to our South Florida community. Let's talk about, first, let's talk about the organization that you are the past chairman. Tell us about the National Trans Bar Association. We know about the American Bar Association. Basically, tell us about what you
We're
do.
the American Bar Association for transgender attorneys.
Yeah. There is trans attorneys.
There are hundreds of trans attorneys across the country.
Right.
In fact, when I first came out, one of the first calls I made when I was considering it was to, I do family law, divorce and family law in New York. And I called around to find out if there were other attorneys who mid-career had come out and to find out what their experience was. And I found an out trans attorney who did family law in Kansas City, Missouri. And I'm like, well, what was it like? It must have been horrible. You're in Kansas City. She goes, oh no, my practice has tripled. I'm like, what? And we are a group. She had done very, very well. This is a woman who is recognized as a fighter. And if you can fight to be an out trans person in Kansas, imagine what you can do for your clients. We are an association of attorneys who are just like her, for the most part. There are a few who are still closeted, but there are literally hundreds of us across the nation and around the world who band together to do several things. 1, provide support. 2, provide education. 3, mentoring. And 4, to be the voice of trans attorneys in places like the ABA and places where rulemaking is done. We have represented trans clients. We have advocated for trans issues, and that's the work that we do.
You know, it's incredible to meet you. Welcome again to South Florida. One of the things that I think is fascinating is first that National Trans Bar Association, in terms of that level of professional representation in community, not even in LGBTQ+, but in the professional view of community, and having trans represented in it is so wonderful, because we constantly tell the story of part of our 501c3 of our media platform is that our community is everywhere, and that includes trans.
Absolutely
trans
true.
is everywhere, and you're another illustration of that.
Look, about half of Americans say they don't know anybody trans. Well, I say to them, no, that's not true. What you don't know is that you do know somebody who's trans, because you can't always tell who's trans and who's not. Some of us are visibly trans, others are not. Not that many wear a transgender symbol, you know, but I wear a lapel pin, a trans flag lapel pin, every time I walk into a courthouse.
Right, right.
A lot of times judges are like, what nation is that from? And best experience, one of the judges asked me, I said, well, it's the transgender flag. He was like, I said, yeah. He goes, oh. The next time I was before that judge, he called me up after the case was over. He says, I want to show you something. And he showed me his daughter's wedding to another woman.
Oh, wonderful.
And he said, I'm so proud of her, and I would never have known, but thank you for representing trans attorneys in my courtroom.
Yeah.
You cannot assume that everybody who's not knowing is going to be hostile to you.
Yeah.
And we don't.
Yeah. So again, Kristen Browdy, past chairman of the National Trans Bar Association. You've moved from Westchester, right outside of New York City. Mm-hmm. Very liberal, very embracing.
Yes.
New York is New York. You move to Florida. I pretty much imagine that Florida is exactly the same as New York. Oh wait,
not quite.
Not quite.
Well, look, I come from Chappaqua, New York, the home of the Clintons.
Oh, right.
And it was a great place to come out. I came out. The town was like, yeah, okay, fine. Move on. I was secretary of the board of ethics.
Yeah, why are we talking about this?
And I called the town supervisor and said, look, I'm going to be coming out. Do you want me to resign? He's like, why should you resign? Life went on. We have been so successful in New York. We flipped the state Senate. We got bills through. Virtually every piece of equality legislation that is needed has been signed into law, first by Andrew Cuomo, now by Kathy Hochul. And as I was getting a little older, thinking, okay, what do we do now? I have a union pension from back when I was in broadcasting. I'm like, I can be a lawyer part-time. I can live with my pension, and I can go down and enjoy some sunshine. And where should I do that? Where's the battle? Where's the battle for equality? There is nowhere where that is being more directly and violently fought than right here in Florida. Yeah, Texas is bad. Tennessee's bad. There are a couple other places that are bad. But Florida is ground zero. Yep. And that's what decided it for me. I'm like, okay, I don't know. We don't come with expiration dates. We have no idea how long we're going to be here. But my view is that for every day that I am here, I want to try to make this world a better place. Yeah. And where can you better do that than to fight back against the crap that is flowing from a guy who says he's for freedom, but is in fact
who was that? What's his name again?
I call him Ayatollah Ron.
Ayatollah Ron.
Ayatollah Ron, he's for freedom as long as you do whatever the heck it is that he wants you to do. You want parental rights? Well, parental rights in education don't seem to matter for parents of trans kids. Parental rights don't matter for parents of LGBTQ kids. Why is that, Ron? You say you're a conservative? A conservative would get the hell out of the way. A small government conservative would want nothing to do with regulating how people dress, how they raise their kids. He is not that. He's a hypocrite. And yeah, Democrats are a little bit demoralized. They took it on the chin in this election cycle. But we can fix that. Yeah. We have to do the work to fix that, and that's why I'm here.
Yeah. I'm curious in terms of what we've watched. I need some legal advice. And the legal advice that I need is, can you please explain to me really simply, how can the governor basically sell a bill of goods that woke comes to die in Florida when he was educated at Harvard and Yale? I just can't make the connection of...
You think there might be some hypocrisy there? Look, I can't offer you legal advice in Florida. I'm admitted in New York.
Oh, I see.
However, I can read the Constitution of the state of Florida. I can tell you that Ron DeSantis has never read it, or if he has, he's pretending he hasn't. And he's going to get that document shoved right in his face as he tries this nonsense. And it is nonsense. Look, being transgender has no more significance to whether you are a good or bad person than whether you are right or left-handed, whether you are blonde, brunette, or bald. You are either a good person or you are not. You either contribute to your society or you do not. You either make the life of your people around you and your family better or you do not. We want for our families the same thing that everybody who is cisgender wants for their families. We want our kids to have safe, good schools. We want our communities to be clean and well taken care of. We want our taxes to be low. We want our utilities to be working. We want our roads to be good and our police force to be appropriate, to protect us against those who would break the law, but not be brutal to those who don't break the law. Mm-hmm. The same things that cisgender people want. Why does he think that it would be different?
Well, I imagine that the trans community and the LGBTQ community in South Florida has a new ally that's probably going to explain that clearly to the governor.
I think you can expect to hear from him.
Yes, I think so. One of the things that I want to ask you about is, so you've come to the Florida LGBTQ Democratic Caucus. I've been to 4 or 5 of these meetings. I understand that you're going to run for office.
Yes. Look, the first thing I did, the day I got to Florida, was go to a demonstration with Equality Florida. I'd been on the board of Equality New York. I went to a demonstration with Equality Florida to deal with these ridiculous regulations that the Board of Medicine is trying to cram down everybody's throats to block trans care. The next thing I did was go to work for Annette Taddeo's campaign running for Congress. She would have been my congressperson. The next logical thing in advocacy for me is I am now the vice president of the Flamingo Dems. That's the Miami-Dade. And I want to work with Nathan Brummer, who is, I expect, about to become our president of the LGBTQ Caucus. And I will run I am a candidate for vice president of that organization.
Excellent.
And when Ron DeSantis thinks of trans people, I want him thinking of me. And I want him thinking that if he screws around with me, I almost used a little bit more violent word.
Oh, you can use the F word at Queer News Tonight.
I might be able to, but after all those years, 41 years of broadcasting, I've learned to never drop an F-bomb around a microphone.
Yeah, right. Fortunately, I can.
You can, that's fine. I still won't. Because, goodness knows where it might go.
What do you think the trans community's reaction would be, and LGBTQ community's reaction would be, that the top political advocacy organization in Florida for LGBT has a trans man as president, as new president, and a trans woman as vice president? That's really historic.
Well, I was the first trans candidate endorsed by the New York Democratic Party when I was running for office up in New York. The world did not come to an end. I think that the Florida Democratic Party needs to understand just how strong this community can be and just how solidly the entire LGBTQ coalition is. That's 10% of Florida.
I want to jump in right there.
Sure.
In the panel that I just watched you participate in, you had quite a scathing rebuke to the Florida Democratic Party.
Yes.
Kind of help us understand why the success or failure or lack of organization of the Florida Democratic Party is important to LGBT.
Judges are appointed by governors in this state. Judges are only removed by voters. Laws are made by legislators in this state, as they are everywhere, and signed into law by governors. All of those laws affect all of our lives. And the only way we can make change is to get the people in office to do the right thing. How do you do that? You get your people elected. You get rid of the people who are doing the bad things. Okay, how do you do that? The Florida Democratic Party has not, to date, done the basics that are necessary, at least not in this past election cycle. I worked for Annette Taddeo's campaign, and I've never seen a more abysmal campaign. And I've seen some badass
From the Florida Democratic Party.
Anywhere.
Yeah.
And I've worked on campaigns in New York, North Carolina, Missouri, and here.
Yeah.
And that was awful.
Yeah.
It was awful. And the problem is that we do our organizing in the weeks before an election, in the post Labor Day up to election. That's not good enough, particularly in Miami-Dade. And probably in Broward, too, where Fort Lauderdale has a lot of high-rises.
High-rise buildings.
You cannot do the traditional door-to-door that makes a difference in elections in these buildings. So what do you do? Because there's security. You can't get there. Well, the answer is you need to go to your voter rolls. You need to do your database mining and find out who are the key Democrats in those buildings. You need to be organizing now for a year and a half from now.
Yeah.
And we're not doing that yet. Now, Nikki Fried has just been elected chair. I know that she knows how to win a statewide race.
In clarity, Nikki Fried has just been elected the chairman of the Florida Democratic Party.
As we're sitting here, in the past 45 minutes, she's been elected. And I know she knows how to do it. So I'm looking forward to working with her, working with every like-minded Florida Democrat to do that work, not just in those last weeks before an election, so that we can effectively turn out the vote. The difference this time around was that Democrats did not vote off year. Non-party affiliates didn't show up. Now, those MPAs are critically important. The Democrats who didn't show up. Democrats who don't show up elect Republicans.
Yep.
You know?
I want to ask you what other thing that relates to your legal observation. DeSantis is creating quite a chill in Florida. He's legislating without even having the legislative base. He's leading in chill and fear. One of those areas is in drag, and what's happening to drag queens and drag shows. What, from your legal perspective, what's your sense there of what we're watching?
Let me give you some statistics. There's a website, Joe My God. Joe My God tracks arrests for sexual exploitation of children and convictions. They do a great job. And in the past week, as we're sitting here talking, there have been 17 people either arrested or convicted of, these are adults, convicted or arrested for sex crimes involving children. Of those 17, 14 were pastors or otherwise affiliated associate pastors, youth pastors at evangelical churches. One was a police officer. One was the husband of a pastor. And that means one other person. And that person, like all those arrested, none of them were drag queens. None of them were transgender. So when he's talking about pedophiles and groomers, which he loves to talk about, like the Moms Against Liberty love to talk about, libs of TikTok love to talk about, are they passing laws preventing people from taking their kids and leaving them with pastors? Because those are the ones who are committing the crimes. It is not drag queens. So what the heck is Ron DeSantis talking about? What is it that Blazing Goglia is legislating against? What is it that is driving these people? Because it sure as hell isn't the statistics. It isn't. Here's a better one. Do you know how many there are about, estimate 1.5 million transgender people in the United States. In the past 50 years, do you know how many of those transgender people have been arrested for any crime involving peeping, using a women's room improperly, using a changing room? Do you know how many?
No.
One. 1.5 million, 50 years, one arrest. That person's in jail where she belongs. Do you know how many United States Congress people there are? 535. That is a tiny fraction of the trans population. In 50 years, do you know how many of them have been arrested? The answer is 7. So who is it that we're legislating against? Yeah. These guys are projecting that the way they think is the way we... The last thing we want to do is harm a child. The last thing we want to do is commit a crime. We are much more likely to have crimes committed against us in changing rooms and bathrooms than anything else. This is nonsense designed to distract people from the other BS things that these ayatollahs and these, let's call them Christian nationalists, although I think Christian's the wrong word for them, these American Taliban would have us be subject to. And if I have anything to do with it, we're going to stop them in their tracks. And that's going to mean we've got to do some work. We've got to do it round the clock, not just at election time, so that when they're putting out this propaganda, we're countering it with the facts. We're counting it with the statistics. 17 arrests in a week, not one of them a drag queen, 14 of them Christian pastors. What the heck?
You know, it's very funny. I know we're going to have many conversations in this coming year. Past chair of the National Trans Bar Association, new resident, Miami-Dade County, Kristen Browdy. You know, as you were speaking there, I was thinking of a very famous film. Western film that popped into mind, and as I was listening to you speak, I kept thinking, "Oh, there's a new sheriff in town." I think that's
there's a new bitch in town.
It's wonderful. Welcome to South Florida.
Thank you.
You're going to get a few thousand. This isn't New York's, but
yeah, I get that all the time.
Yeah,
don't New York my Florida.
Yeah, exactly.
Honey, you need a little more New York in Florida. Just as New York could use a little more Florida in it too.
Yeah,
but that's just the sunshine we need up there,
yeah.
And you need a little of our politics down here.
Get to know this name, Kristen Browdy. Thank you very much
Thank you,
for
Al.
sitting with us at Queer News tonight.
Sure.
LGBTQ plus news is vital for our community and for the broader world as a whole. We have enough enemies at Fox News. Tucker, Sean, and Laura are loud. We need passionate allies. Happening Out television network, Queer News Tonight, and It's Happening Out are literally out of the closet and into the headlines. Our community needs your support. Like this broadcast and subscribe now to ensure the growth of the entire LGBT